It is just over a year ago that I made this bowl. Some of you may remember having seen it. Well, okay, I think it's now time for another bowl. And this next bowl, it's going to be pretty much the same, only a little bit more complicated. It'll have probably 3 or 4 times as many segments in it. I do have some aspen and some mahogany left over from other projects. That's what I used in that first bowl. But I'm going to add some purple heart. I think it's going to add a nice touch to it. And this is purple heart. And it is kind of purpley. I think we're all pretty familiar with mahogany, beautiful wood. And aspen, that's just a fancy name for a poplar tree. There's billions of them here in Canada. But this purple heart, it comes basically from Central and South America. Now I have read that purple heart trees can grow up to 170 feet tall. How would you like to have one of them in your backyard? I have this simple 2-dimensional drawing program in my computer, and I find that if I draw things out and do it to scale and then print it out, as long as it's a small thing that is, it makes it a lot easier. In this case, what I can do is I can measure the angles and the sizes of the segments, and then I can adjust the miter saw. You'll see what I'm talking about later. I'm planning on having the base of the bowl solid mahogany, and it's going to be about 8 inches in diameter, and the only board that I've got is about 4.5 inches wide, so I've got to join 2 pieces together here to give me those 8 inches. So I'm going to cut off a piece here about 16 inches long. It's a lot easier to pass a long piece through the jointer than a couple of short pieces. In fact, short pieces are downright dangerous in a jointer. Okay, now that these edges are nice and square and flat, they'll glue together a lot better, make a much stronger join. Maybe that's why they call this machine a jointer. Okay, now I can cut my 2 short pieces. If you're wondering what that big vacuum hose is hooked onto, well, it's hooked onto this thing. Not the most expensive machine in my workshop, but by far the most valuable. I use it in conjunction with almost everything. There's 8 different combinations that this thing can be glued together, and I want the grain and the color to match the best. Sometimes this works out, and sometimes it doesn't. This is the first time that I actually get to try out my clamp caddy. I want to glue the base together first. I want the glue to have a lot of chance to cure before I fasten the base to the lathe. That's where the most stress is going to be, initially anyway. This jig that I made up for when I do glue ups like this really works well. It keeps the squeeze out from getting smeared around on your work. Here you can see how that jig helps to hold those 2 boards perfectly flat, while it doesn't smear the glue around. Okay, it's the next morning. A good 12 hours has passed. Let's see what we've got here now. Well, that looks like a really good strong joint. I just hope it doesn't show up too badly in the bottom of the bowl after everything's done. Okay, I'm going to leave that mahogany base until later. I'm kind of anxious to see how cutting these segments is going to go. And as you can see, I've modified my miter saw just a little bit here. Okay, the idea of having this sacrificial piece here is so that in the event that the segment should get loose, it won't get sucked in here. I'm setting my miter saw to 12 degrees here, but as you're going to see in a minute, that was wrong. I put the glue line blade on the table saw and I've ripped up a bunch of scrap wood here for test segments. I've taken one of the rings at random here and I'm just going to make up a test ring out of that scrap wood. Well, the length is right, but the angle is wrong. It should have been 6 degrees, not 12 degrees. I miscalculated. Not the first time, won't be the last. Okay, everything's reset to 6 degrees, and I've made a new sacrificial fence. Now let's cut up some segments the right way. Well, that looks pretty good. Now I'll just cut the rest of them and see if I have to twink the miter saw a little bit one way or the other, but I think everything's going to be okay. Well, I don't think I'm going to mess with those angles. They look pretty good. I don't think I could improve on them one way or the other. All I have to do is change the length of each segment to change the diameter of the rings. The angles will always remain constant. Okay, now I may as well start cutting up the real stuff. That purple heart sure does contrast nicely against that aspen. I hope it does the same in the finished bowl. And here we go, cutting the segments for the real thing. I'm making this video as I go along here, so there may be surprises in store yet. And if the angles are okay on the first ring, they should all be okay for the next 7. Okay, we've made the mahogany base and the mahogany segments for the first ring, and now the next ring has to be all aspen. Now I think that if I make the segments for each ring about 1/10 of an inch longer than the ring before, the angle should be just about right. We'll see how it goes. Being as I'm going to have to do this 8 times, I've changed my hold-down clamping system to something a little bit more functional here. My intention all along was that this thing be a flower pot. I'm planning on taking it to Kelowna so that my mom can use it for her flowers. So I think from now on I'm going to refer to it as a pot, not a bowl. Now each one of these rings consists of 30 pieces. So this next ring is going to need 10 purple heart and 20 aspen. And I sure want to remember to increase each ring by 1/10 of an inch per segment. Okay, now the next ring is going to be the opposite. It's going to have 20 purple heart and 10 aspen. And then the remaining 4 rings are just going to be duplicates of the first 4, only bigger. And once again, we have to increase the length by about 1/10 of an inch. Okay, I think you get the idea here. I'm not going to force you to watch me making the next 4 rings. They're going to be done the same way. They'll just be bigger. Cutting up those segments actually went a lot faster than I thought it was going to. And this saw that I got from Canadian Woodworker, it did a really nice accurate job. There are 240 segments altogether in this pot. And this is the one I've been waiting for. The last one. As well as that string holding everything together, I also have an elastic band. And when I was taking the string off, the elastic band also slipped off. I ended up with some segments on the floor. Well, as I've said before, I don't do reenactments. What you see is what you get. Right now that pot is about 17 centimeters tall, but after I get all those segments glued together and then pass the rings through the drum sander, it's going to be a little bit less. It's going to be interesting to see just how much I do lose here. I have enough left over from those boards that I ripped up for another project. That'll be nice. When I glue these rings up, I want them to glue up as reasonably flat as possible. So I've got this old plate glass mirror here. That's about as flat as you can get. I like to save those plastic liners from cereal boxes. They work really good for something like this. The glue won't stick to them. They just peel right off. You'll see later. I'm going to do a dry run here. If there's going to be any problems pop up, I want to know about it before I get glue all over the place. Marking where that ring is actually going to go on the plastic will help me place the segments after I've got the glue on each piece. Okay, if I put another sheet of cereal box plastic and then another flat piece of glass and then a weight on top of it, oh, and by the way, that weight isn't as heavy as it looks, and then wait about 4 hours, I think it should be okay. Well, if what I just did was the dry run, this must be the wet run. Here we go, doing the real thing. Alright, just 7 more to go, and I'm hoping that when I get to the small rings, I'll have room to do 2 at a time. Well, once again it's the next morning, and again about 14 hours has passed, so we'll see how this thing turned out. Notice how easily those cereal box liners pull away from the glue. I'm really satisfied with this. It's not going to be falling apart. Now it's time to do the next ring. The next 6 rings should be done exactly the same way, and hopefully in about 48 hours they'll be ready for me to run through the sander.